Hello, everyone. Welcome to the sixth workshop, which is about economics, corporates, and then capitalism. So what we're going to deal with today is markets, corporates, and then capitalism, communism a little bit, and then international institutions, OBOR, currency, and how dollar functions, and then investment and spending. Looks a lot difficult, but it's not that difficult. But also it's not just the only scope of economics. There's a lot more which we'll try to deal with in terms of the motions and in terms of, I guess, tomorrow's mock. So I'm going to give you an assignment today because that's really important. And that could be one of the motions that could be set because it's really prevalent as of today. Cool. Starting with how market essentially functions. So there's something called as supply and demand, which applies to the most of the cases. So the more is the demand in the market, the more is the supply. Meaning, let's say there are, let's take a commodity, and let's say that there is one particular T-shirt, and which is of a particular brand. Let's say AFX. I made up my own brand. So if this is the brand and this is the T-shirt that is being there, and a lot of people start loving it, there's going to be more demand for that T-shirt, and therefore the more number of people want to buy it, the more number of production is also going to be there in market. Meaning, if I, as a consumer, demand the supply is going to be created by the manufacturers. Unless until there is an exception that, they don't have raw materials, it's really difficult to, let's say, produce that amount of T-shirt. It's just very specific and unique. I don't think that's just an exception. However, if it is largely a business where people are coming up with innovation, people are trying to come up with in terms of creating new market and all of that, if people like it and if people want to buy it, there's going to be demand for it, and therefore the moment there is demand, the manufacturers are going to be forced to supply for it. And I think it also makes sense because if there is demand for it, and that basically means that there is scope of, let's say, profit for that institution, and therefore they would essentially increase the supply as well. All right. There's some whole graph in economics which talks about how supply and demand is proportionate. I don't think you need to know about it in terms of debate. So you just need to know about how the moment when people like something and when people are demanding for it, it should essentially increase the supply for it as well. This analysis can largely be used, for example, in terms of how there is something called as green tech, right? So if people are starting to increase the amount of technology to make sure that the environment is not being harmed, so people first say that, oh, it's essentially going to be and if people essentially like it, the demand for it is essentially going to increase, meaning there has to be more supply for it. But if an innovation is in the market and people don't necessarily like it, there's going to be no demand for it. And therefore, people essentially, and that particular manufacturer will essentially stop making it at some point of time. Therefore, let's say if it is innovation with respect to, trying to save environment and so on and so forth, it's something which is in demand. People essentially are looking forward to it. And therefore, there's going to be more demand for it. And therefore, there's going to be more supply for it. The reason why I'm talking about demand and supply so much is because the moment when there's demand, when there's supply, it can also affect the prices because of it. Can anyone try to give a wild guess as to why, let's say, because there is more supply, the cost is also going to be reduced somehow?
Because there will be a lot of people buying it, so you don't need to get a profit on every shot, so they'll reduce the prices and they'll get the equal amount of profit on a single shot.
Yeah, so this can be one of the reasons.
Wouldn't you want to increase the price? Because if the supply is more, that means the demand is more. So that means if the demand is more, people are willing to pay the price to get that certain product.
Here's the thing, right? I mean, that's a very good question. This can be true for, let's say, the goods and the niche where people essentially are rich enough to be able to buy it. But however, when it comes to things which needs more accessibility of people, there's going to be decrease in this, in the cost of production. The reason why this is true is because of the fact that, let's say there's a particular product in the market. The reason why they would reduce, I mean, it's not just they would reduce the price, obviously. It's not because of people are demanding, let's just reduce the price. It's not about that. It's basically that they would be able to reduce price simply because when you have something called as large scale production, you can have economies of scale, meaning it's easier for me to produce 10 product at the same time, as opposed to just producing one particular product. It's easier for me to like producing something in bulk as opposed to me producing something in like short scale in the first place. Therefore, their cost of production reduces to a really large extent, meaning they have the ability to reduce prices on each product and therefore go ahead and like sell it on lower products. If you have lower products, it's even going to be like substantially increasing your demand in the market, simply because there are more people who would be able to access it. More people then would be your consumers, and so on and so forth. So it's basically that chain which keeps going on and on. I hope it like responds to your question. So it's not that, oh, people would decrease it. It's basically like, oh, people have the ability to decrease it. All right. Then how does the accessibility of the goods can be increased by reducing cost of production? I think I've already told you with respect to answering that question, like that basically increase the capability of spending of individuals and access those things, meaning the same product, can it be accessed by more number of people? Let's just like divide the entire population with respect to rich, middle class, and then lower middle class and like poor people. So some people can never be able to buy a particular kind of product. That is like true. But there is capability of, let's say, these middle class individuals being able to buy that product, and therefore you would be having more accessibility with respect to that. But even apart from that, let's say some kinds of products don't really have accessibility, but they do have demand, but also they do have a large impact in the society. For example, like electric cars. So what can government do is essentially subsidize these kinds of products in order to make it accessible to these individuals. So it's one of the things that like people can do, and this is one of the arguments that you can use, that, oh, if a particular thing is so inaccessible, governments essentially can go ahead and subsidize these products and therefore be able to, let's say, make it accessible to people. And I think subsidies essentially work for a lot of things as well. I think gas subsidies, electricity subsidies, and so on and so forth. But make sure that whenever you're giving this example of subsidy, okay, question, what do you guys think government has the most incentive to subsidize?
Understanding that the government is at the end of the day run by a political institution, probably to gain popular support.
Okay. Yes. Oh.
I feel government like is most likely going to try and subsidize electricity because of costs like skyrocketing in that sense.
Okay. So by far we have two things. One, to get a popular support. Then we have another thing called as, what did you say, Vedant, again?
Yeah, so I said that I believe like the government is most likely going to subsidize electricity and stuff, because electricity is very important, because as we already see, gas prices are increasing. People aren't being able to afford these basic commodities. So the government aims to do that to keep power and to get more votes.
Okay. Anything else? What kind of products is government more likely to subsidize?
Products which are used by like the masses and more number of people.
Okay.
So, for example, in India, that would be catering to the agricultural population.
Yes. So we can also say that it's not just like used by most number of people, but also like the vulnerable community as well. All right, so we do know that government has an active incentive to go ahead and subsidize for several things, but it's also the responsibility of government, simply because welfare, and also making sure that like they're catering to the needs of the people. So this is important insofar as your characterization for the government is necessary, insofar as you want to like respond to like, whoa, why would government essentially go ahead and subsidize? But I want to ask the question, why do you think government essentially cannot subsidize everything?
Because of the amount of money that the government has in itself. So probably a counter argument that is usually given to socialism or communism, that the government in itself is not an actor which is, let's say, very rich. It is also dependent upon the amount of taxes that it receives from the people. In the scenario wherein the government is not developed, wherein the country is not developed, then this revenue that it's generating might not be enough to let the government subsidize everything.
Correct. What else? So where do you think government gets money to even subsidize things?
Government gets money to subsidize things from like the richer parts of the community from people who have to pay like wealth tax.
Okay. So basically, like in general, I don't think there is specificity in terms of, oh, this is the kind of money that we're going to use. But basically, the government uses the revenue that it collects from different kinds of people through taxes, different kinds of taxes and stuff like that. So yes, it is based on the public revenue. And do you know how many number of people in India actually pay taxes? It's very less. I'm just telling you, it's very less. So it's basically like, if insofar as we're talking about developing nations, the number of people who are able to pay taxes is essentially very less. Why do you think like in India, it's like going unchecked and people necessarily don't pay taxes?
Well, obviously, first of all, most people won't be able to pay taxes just because of the fact that they are under poverty line. But then there are the people that choose not to pay taxes, even when they have the capability to do so. I guess it's just wealth preservation of the middle class or the upper class at large.
A lot of people in India are employed in the unorganized sector. So it's
Exactly.
extremely hard for the government to actually track, especially if you're like doing jobs just like tuitions, which a lot of people do, right? And they aren't really like come under the organized sector under the rules and regulations.
Exactly. So then you have a proper analysis as to why government has less capability to go ahead and subsidize certain kinds of goods, even in developing nations. Because this argument is actually going to be used for developing nations. I think you have enough analysis for like to counter as to why subsidies are even not going to work. All right. Moving forward then. Then how essentially can you reduce price for commodities? And this is important because like oftentimes in not, people are some countries are necessarily able to like have less price for like even like things which can be very expensive. For example, there is cheap raw material in China, and therefore they are able to like produce not just like Chinese mobiles, but in general, a lot of things that they have access to. Secondly, if a particular country is able to have more access to some particular kind of raw material and they have more extraction for it, they're also able to like have cheaper access to those kinds of goods. Thirdly, in terms of efficient transportation services, so the better the transportation services are, the better or like the lower the kind of like price of a particular product can be. It's also based on things like how fast the transportation is, how cheap the transportation is, and so on and so forth. But also there's a lot of like taxation that goes on with respect to trades and import. For example, if I have to go ahead and import some kind of raw material which exists in Bangladesh, however in India it's not present whatsoever, so it's like better for me to go ahead and like get it from Bangladesh because it's cheaper and it makes more sense. However, it is going to get more expensive because of the kind of like excise duty and then imports duty that is going to be imposed on it. But on the counterfactual, let's say government does not impose such kind of taxes on these kinds of products, the ability of me to get cheaper access to these things is going to be extremely high, and therefore the product cost in of itself is going to be reduced. Can anyone just give me like a brief understanding of what do you understand by the cost? Like what do you think the cost of a particular thing is dependent on? Let's say let's just take an example of this Tetra Pak milkshake that you get. What do you think is it dependent on?
Cheap labor.
Okay, yes, cheap labor.
Cost of production.
Yes, but like I would want you to like elaborate on that because I don't think a lot of people would know cost of production.
You have in your cost of production, you have cost of your labor, you have cost of setting up, and you have cost of like the taxes that you have to pay. So that combines into the cost of production, which eventually how far the market is. So the transportation costs are also there, and also if you publicity, right? Publicity is a huge part. So if you're also marketing, so that also adds on to your cost of production, which then sold at a marginal profit.
Yeah. So you basically like anything that goes behind a particular product is going to be like considered as cost of production. Like basically if you are trying to have um milkshake, okay, so you would essentially need supply of milk, and if you have like a tender with a particular I don't know, like those who supply milk, you would have a tender with them, and then for that, how much money are you spending, how much milk are you like purchasing, but also on the top of that sugar, on the top of that like flavors and all of that. So a lot of things goes behind that, but also like how much time and how much money is it taking for you to get those raw materials towards the place where you're actually manufacturing all of these things. All of it matters a lot in terms of like just knowing the total cost of production that is actually taking. But in general, what you would want is basically, let's say, the cost of production of
Please for everyone.
Is ma'am frozen?
Yeah, I think yes, yeah.
Cool. So let's say if you are trying to produce 10,000 packs of Tetra Pak milkshake, and it is, let's say, 1 lakh, you would make sure that your total like price of the entire commodity is more than that, so that you're able to have some amount of profit. So you will make sure, let's say, the total price is 2 lakhs for the entire 10,000 Tetra Packs. Basically, then your profit is going to be 1 lakh, because the total amount of money that you spent on it was essentially 1 lakh, but then you got 2 lakhs in total, which means 1 lakh is the delta that's there. All right. So what you essentially want to do is make sure that the cost of production is low, so that you're able to make sure that the price of the commodity is also low. Otherwise, if your cost of production of itself is 2 lakhs, you would make sure that the price is essentially also 3 lakhs, right? Because you want some amount of like profit for yourself, for you as a company or like a manufacturer to even run and sustain, right? Because essentially that profit is going to be used to pay people in terms of salaries, but also that profit is also going to be used to, let's say, invest in more raw materials and so on and so forth. Cool. Then what else can you do is basically give GST waiver. For example, in India, you have like no GST for essential commodities. And therefore, if a particular thing is essential commodity, the price is largely going to be lesser because it doesn't have GST on it. But then also mass production, because economies of scale that I've already told you, and then less money spent on labors. Now, I think like even if you want to say that, oh, cost of production is also going to be taking care of like labors and and everything, I think the moment when you have automation or machines, the cost of production for the longer run is going to be reduced, simply because you're having a one-time investment on machines, but also the efficiency of machines and the productivity of machines is larger than a labor for that matter. So let's say if a particular person is it's a wrapping job, and you're trying to wrap the toffee that is being given to you, as opposed to a machine which is able to do it like much faster than a human being, it's like obviously better for you to go ahead and like automate that process. Which means that if you have machines and you have automated process, you all obviously have more production, and therefore you would be able to, let's say, use the same amount of money to have cheaper goods and stuff like that. But then and that's also like why like a lot of like workers have been exploited. Can anyone give me a general understanding as to why you think workers get exploited because of machines, because of existence of automation?
Obviously, machines they're much faster and like cheaper way of getting the same work done, right? Sometimes even better because there's no chance for error. So then obviously this means that the workers are not getting enough jobs, which reduces their salary, right? Since the machines are doing all of the work for them.
Okay, so your job is taken away.
So you can also say, I guess, there's competition between like the workers and the machines. And whenever there's competition, you need to like reduce your prices. So then the workers will have to work and do the same work for a lesser amount of price, or will have to do like more work for the same price.
Correct.
But like on the counterfactual,
Hmm.
in a scenario wherein there is a capability of this particular company or nation to get automation, but they're not doing that because of the fact that labor is cheap. So the statement wherein you say that labor is would always be cheaper in India than machines, the fact that then you push this necessity upon workers to work harder and to just to make sure about the fact that there is an existence of a job or an image of it, that they have to be exploited to actually end up being in a safe position.
Hmm. Who do you think has the capability to even automate a lot of processes that exist in manufacturing?
Probably companies. If like let's say a random biscuit company wants automation to occur in their particular factories, then they can a ensure that scientists are able to innovate something, but b they can also ensure that random simple machines can be used.
Another question: who do you think has the capability of innovate?
Scientists.
No, my question is basically this. I mean, the ability of a company or a manufacturer to go ahead and first like get access to automation or machines is based on the fact whether or not they're like making those that much amount of profit, or B, like they also have that much amount of capital, right? In order to, let's say, just go ahead and like invest. But secondly, in order to get R&D, it essentially means that you have even more profits in your company, which is like very idealistic for a company to have. But then secondly, this also means that small companies, small manufacturing units would not go ahead and automate themselves because of the like same idea. That's the question I was trying to make.
So the consumers then, because if I, as let's say a very moralistic consumer, would not want to buy products from particular company just because of the fact that I know they do labor exploitation, then I would at the end of the day buy, let's say, a popular movement able to stop them from creating profits and ultimately stop them from having this capacity of doing something like this.
So again, does anyone want to like counter that question as to like how people are essentially so woke that they would not go ahead and buy products from companies who go ahead and do labor exploitation?
Obviously, now companies won't advertise this, right? That yeah, we do this. So how we first of all, how will the customer get to know about this? Because there's no way of them knowing about it unless there are like, buyers who go in the company, and that's obviously not there. Um, Second, products which like usually like have machines working instead of laborers. It's usually the products are much cheaper, and they're much cheaper, right? So, and you're getting the same sort of type and same quality as well. Maybe
Yeah.
so. Then why would a customer?
So essentially, the analysis then becomes is that does like do we care about whether or not laborers are getting paid, or do we care about whether or not I'm getting something cheaper than the other thing? So why does it impact?
I think for companies setting up an obviously if they have enough, there are large scale companies, for example, MNCs, right? Um, if they have so much capital, what would they rather prefer to like be technologically advanced and set this one time investment, which will save them labor costs for a very long period of time? Um,
Hmm.
or like having to pay labor, especially in countries which have strict labor laws, like it becomes extremely difficult. Um,
Hmm.
and that is why they even prefer to set up in it because they need some amount of labor to an extent, and they prefer to set up their production in areas where the labor laws are very flexible and they can employ them for seasonal work.
Hmm.
I
Um,
think then, yeah,
yeah,
so should I go ahead?
go on.
Yes, I think then on the counterfactual, it becomes equally bad for the laborers, because in one situation you do have them losing their employment if automation does happen. If, like, let's say there's an onset of artificial intelligence further on, to let's say there's for more technology, and then you don't have this class of people knowing exactly how to operate the technology, even to gain that much amount of privilege to be a part of educational institutions, etc. And on the other side of it, you have them getting exploited just to get money in their hands. I think then what the metric becomes is that on which side is it going to be better off for these laborers to actually operate, or to have even a chance to to be in a better position. I think then, like, when we say that how would we know about this company actually exploiting laborers in the very first place, then the way it came out for for the exploitation of Bangladeshi workers at the hands of Walmart, or like the fact that we know that there's something happening in China even after it's China that we're talking about, then there is still a counterfactual wherein there is some amount of wokeness. I do agree with the fact that this might not be enough to stop this entire older generation from buying something just because it's violating the rights of a random person that you don't even know about because of the lack of connectivity, because of the lack of care that they have. But I do think that it is actually enough for governments at large to impose some sort of restriction. For example, even though the American individual might not be woke enough to do something, the Biden administration on principle would not let it happen. And once the Biden administration does point this out, then this American individual would have to agree with it, simply because of the fact that A, it's the government, so even if they don't, it doesn't matter. But B, the fact that once you're just pushed into that moral dilemma, whether or not you want small children getting their hands bled for your random t-shirt, then they would naturally say no, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's also one of the things. And that's basically depend on how you are showing people with respect to, like, basically through media, that, oh, this is how harmful it is. Other than that, if people don't really know about it, it doesn't really make a
Honestly,
difference.
I don't think government cares, especially obviously like in developed countries there are labor laws, but in India there are such flexible labor laws, especially to like get foreign investment. Um, and also, even if there are certain labor laws to protect the laborers, most of them work under the unorganized sector, and the
Yeah.
government turns a blind eye on them and like doesn't to like most of the companies, even though they are like working under the rules and regulation of the government, employ the workers in other conditions, and the government doesn't think that they're like they're valuable companies to the government
This
for their economies.
this actually like brings me to this example. Okay, so there's this one labor union in India. I just like cannot recollect the exact facts, but what happened was that they were like fighting for like minimum wages in India, and then later like the court says that, oh, like you are supposed to give minimum wages to these individuals, so it was for 50 rupees. Okay, but then the company in of itself was like into, not a company but like a manufacturing unit or whatever it was, so they were like running on loss at that point of time, meaning they didn't have the capability of like paying even 50 rupees per day to those individuals. It's a very old case. So then what they did was that they started like saying that, oh, we would probably have to fire some of the people, and we wouldn't be able to give them some like these jobs. So then what happened was that these same workers who were asking for minimum wages were like, look, we can work for, let's say, 30 rupees per day, but don't fire like us in the first place. So that's like the condition in India that we are like working on. Like, we don't have money, and that's where like they see that, okay, I'm okay to get exploited, and I'm okay to get less money insofar as it's giving me some amount of money, and it's giving me some amount of like job, and I have something to like give in terms of like bread and butter to my family. And that's like problematic, but that's what happened.
I do think then that on the counterfactual, what like sort of a world are we living in, is that hey, look, even irrespective of the amount of work that you're doing, it is some it is somewhat proportional to the amount of wealth that you're gaining. So, like in this entire globalization circle, if you're getting exploited till level 100, then you're supposed to get money till level 100. But the moment you're not able to do that, then you are in an unprofitable and, let's say, unjust arrangement. Then can it be argued that, look, it's just for you to be exploited, it's just for me to make you work harder than what is standard if I'm giving you more money? Something that like Ford did earlier in 1900s or so, like just giving them more money to make them work harder.
I think fair enough. Like, you can still say that, like, look, even though like the company does not have the capability to pay enough, they're still supposed to do so, because like I think like even government, even like the courts say that, like, we are not like concerned about whether you have the economic capability or not. The fact that you were able to hire them at some point of time, you were obliged on, and you are obliged to them, like to those workers, and you're supposed to pay them the thing that they actually deserve, insofar as they're working for the thing that you're actually like hiring for them. But let's just move on and then tell me, like, why do you think automation is still good?
Probably because, again, for the leaders itself, that it does reduce cost of living, right? Because at the end of the day, if automation is happening, then the cost of production is going to get reduced in, let's say, after a span of few years. We think that it's still better for the society at large, but it's also better for the poor population that is probably the most impacted by automation in the very first place. Because it's obviously not going to be the case that the government is going to forget about them, because A, the government needs votes, B, the government has its duty assigned to it that you cannot have this entire population unemployed. So the government is going to endeavor to do something about it. In the case that it is able to do something about it, you have an entire population ready to actually step up to a better position, but also increase their accessibility and their impact in the market at large.
Fair enough. Nishka, do you have anything with respect to the automation and why it is good?
Right. So I think this has also been discussed before. With automation obviously does increase the profit for the company at large because, well, in the end, they don't need to pay wages to all of these people who they might not even employ for like a large part of the year. So, for example, if it's like a seasonal job where workers are only in demand for a certain period of time because that's when the production demand is really high. Then,
So
well,
can you impact this argument of profitability for me? Why is it good for a nation?
right. So, for example, if, all right. So, first of all, if a company does like earn a lot of profit, let's say by setting up an MNC somewhere in some country, then I think a lot of other countries would also be kind of encouraged to do the same thing because if they see that like import duties and everything, they're really like cheap and you're not getting and you're getting more profit, then all of these other countries will also give like more FDI.
Okay. Anything else?
Another point could be that if you are automating, then you need invention in automation as well. You need development of the machines which are actually automating the businesses in the country. So that means that is also increasing employment and invention in the country.
Also the impact to the increased profitability was like the just like you being able to contribute to the economy and like having higher levels of GDP.
I think okay, this is a very far-reaching argument. I'm not sure if it's like okay. So basically, what I thought of is that when you improve technology, right? When you better the technology, you better when you like you better firstly obviously the environment in a lot of cases because when you're like adapting to the newer technologies that are there that are very sustainable to the environment, it also obviously helps the environment, but also secondly it creates a better overall working condition because especially like for example Bhopal gas tragedy, right? The working conditions in the industry itself with low amount like the I think like the storage thing that they had was broken or something, was like very very cheap, and if they could have maybe improved the technology of that, then it what there the cases of it actually like leading to the tragedy, and they did not have like for example smoke detectors or any protections. Like when you improve with that technology and you said that it would eventually like improve working conditions for workers.
You know, like the debate inside me wants to like argue that, and they say that like the same Bhopal gas tragedy would not have happened because of the very fact that they had to like hire unskilled laborers to even see the automated work, right? Which means that because they were unskilled laborers, they weren't able to, let's say, tackle the problem at the same time, even though there was automation and there was like, you know, some amount of like basically they were machines, right? There were machines involved, meaning like if in case it happens in developing nation where you don't have skilled laborers, which means that people won't be able to like tackle it enough, meaning like you'll probably have to get somebody from outside or somebody who is in the country but is not skilled enough, and you're just going to like make them work things which are they're not even specialized in, is going to be leading to more like of such atrocities and like hazardous disasters, is what I think. But like, yeah, I think that's a good point. Like it leads to sustainable development and environment. The reason why that is true is because let's say if it is about disposal and waste disposal management, I think there are like innovation that creates an automation of the same, which makes sure that the disposal and everything is proper. For example, let's say when you have nuclear fission and stuff like that, you still have now like ability to A, have better disposal system, but B, also like better storage system of the waste and better waste management. So I think that could be used there.
But can't we like rebut this point by talking about the Industrial Revolution? So that was a big progress and there was a huge jump with the Industrial Revolution, but it led to a worse environment in totality.
True. Yeah, you can still say that. Okay, the next thing then is about like the idea that, look, people say that like, oh, there's going to be no job creation whatsoever, but that's wrong, right? Because even if like you are going to have, even if you're just saying that like, oh, there's no job creation for the laborers, sure, it is true for to the extent of like unskilled laborers, but that's not true for the extent of like skilled laborers in the first place. Meaning you would still need people who would be able to, let's say, have the like limited amount of like manual input that you're supposed to give to the automation, the executive like managers and everything, who still goes ahead and checks the like the product quality and so on and so forth. But also like the same argument that you all talked about, like, oh, there's going to be invention, who is going to be the one doing the invention? Who do you think is going to be able to do so? So like the amount of like skilled labor that is going to be like increasing is going to be much more, and that's what like the developing nations want. In and of itself, developing nations want better skilled laborers, more skilled laborers, because it essentially makes sure that your like the economy in and of itself is better off. Cool. I'll just like move forward. Otherwise, I won't be able to finish it at all. Moving on to the corporates. Cool. So you have something called as like corporates. I think like it's basically like the private jobs that are there. I mean, can be like a lot more in terms of like different kinds of like firms. It can be like general professions as well. It can be like skilled labor, non-skilled, but like corporates generally have like a very they do have a very good and like organized structure, as opposed to like a normal unregistered like organization. So corporates do have a little bit more organized structure. They know who's the administrative, like who are in the administrative process, like positions and stuff like that. So basically the problem with corporate structure is basically it's a private job, meaning there's no job security. They can kick you off whenever they want to, based on like whether or not they need you at the time, or whether or not you're able to give them the efficiency that they want. But secondly, the moment you're going to ask for a raise, they're probably going to like remove you as well. But then it's also like bad, because like even if you're like working as much as you can, they still expect you to give more. So a lot of times your like hard work doesn't necessarily like come into the returns and like gives the returns that the company essentially wants. Meaning even if you were working hard, it can lead to you not essentially getting the amount of like appreciation that they like that you essentially deserve and stuff like that. Meaning the moment you don't get like that amount of appreciation, you don't have the job satisfaction that you're doing and stuff like that. And then going ahead, I think a lot of things also goes ahead. I think you can use the same analysis like how private jobs in private markets exist, meaning like more number of people, more number of like more competition, and therefore like the wages are essentially going to be determined by the competition that is existing. Same like analysis. But secondly, there's one thing that is existing with respect to corporates, is that again, if it is a private entity, they would care about profits, and they would make sure that like not just like profits, they also care about one more thing, and that's their reputation in the like market at large. And that's reputation is the thing that you're going to use in order to get like make sure whether or not like the company is going to be getting that amount of like profits and stuff like that. And reputation in of itself make sure that there's check mechanism and people are able to call the company out for, let's say, labor exploitation, let's say not essentially taking care of the environment and stuff like that. But that's exactly why like a lot of the countries have come up with the idea of corporate social responsibility, meaning they will have to like make sure that there are some amount of like social welfare like schemes that they're providing. There's some amount of money that they're actually like funding in terms of like upliftment of like the general upliftment of the workers that are working in the companies and stuff like that. Yes, Navya.
I have a question. So now you're saying that government like any company should have this sort of social service, which they should do. But how are you going to ensure this? Because the greenwashing still exists regardless, right? They can market something, but not necessarily do it themselves.
Yeah, so this corporate social responsibility is not something I'm asking them to do. It's a thing, it's a legislative thing, and that they're supposed to do it no matter what. So it's like a obligatory thing, meaning if you want to like give an argument of saying that, oh, corporates are always bad, you can say that, look, there's something existing called as corporate social responsibility, meaning corporates are always supposed to like make sure and adhere to that responsibility. If they don't do so, they can entertain a suit against them. So that exists, and that's a mandatory thing that is being imposed by the government to them. Okay, then you have, why do you think corporates are being liked by the government? I think a couple of reasons. One, they get returns from them, they get like higher profitability by them, and therefore increase GDP, increase economy, and therefore there's less check mechanism that exists with respect to, like, let's say, developing nations towards these corporates, because that, oh, they're like contributing so much to the economy, why do you want to regulate them, and so on and so forth exists. But also there's something called as corporate, like corporate lobbying, meaning like corporate individuals going ahead and like paying a lot of money to the governments in order to like influence the legislative changes and stuff like that. And therefore like a lot of like problems with respect to regulation of corporate structure also exists. But then I think the same thing I've already told you about. I think job creation versus no job at all. So I think that the very reason as to how you can still like justify that, okay, corporates have bad jobs, but why is it still good, is because A, you're getting wages, B, you're getting experience out of those the place that you're working in. So for example, after I graduate and I get this particular company to give me some amount of job, random job, but I'm not getting paid enough, I can still work there and have it in my CV, seeing that, look, I have some amount of experience. And if you know India like all essentially like gives more credit to, you know, the amount of experience that you have on your CV as opposed to the merit that you have, right? So I think experience in of itself gives you a lot of like let's say exposure to better jobs later. But secondly, you also have ability to call out. I mean, if I don't know if you are aware about this, but there's something called as trade unions, and trade unions are basically like based on, let's say, if you're a teacher, you would have teachers union. If you are a banker, you would have bankers union and stuff like that. So this essentially makes, and students union, like just take you like you like let's just take the example of student union. It's not similar, but let's just assume that student unions work the same way. But student unions are basically the collective interest of the students, right? So you would be able to, let's say, work better in terms of negotiating with the teachers union because you want less homework and stuff like that, right? The same thing is with respect to trade union, right? When you have workers union, these workers can go ahead and like tell that this is what our demands are, this is what we want as a wage, and therefore the employers essentially have to listen to them because there exists a mutual dependency of the employers to the employees. So it's not always the case that, oh, employers are never going to listen to you. They still have dependency over you, and therefore they would want to listen to you as well. But going forward, I have a question. Cool. How do you think worker exploitation can be stopped?
Better labor laws.
Okay, labor laws.
Then probably, obviously, there's corporate social liability upon these companies at the end of the day to not do something. But if we're able to create that much amount of popular support for this very same thing, that is to say that if you're able to create a movement that is ensuring the fact that this person doesn't exploit another person, this might look like people not wanting movies from a particular Hollywood director just because he raped someone. So the fact that if you're able to connect that much amount of emotional impact over this individual and over this action, then you might be able to draw out a necessary result of it.
I want to take a like little bit of time to just like talk about this idea of like call out structure. Why do you think, let's just take an example of I am being exploited in a company. Do you think I have the ability to call them out just as an individual? And even if like, let's say I go ahead and call out, what are the repercussions that I'm supposed to face? And I want others to speak, so I'll ask Vedant.
Ma'am, could you repeat for a second? I
Yeah,
couldn't
so
hear you.
okay, so let's say I, as a worker in a company or as an employee, I get exploited, okay, and I'm like actually very sad about it, and I go on write a tweet that let's say XYZ company is exploiting me, they're bad, they have so many labor violations, stuff like that. What do you think would happen to me?
Ma'am, I feel that if the company is big, it can use like its platform to suppress you.
Exactly.
Yeah, it can use its huge platform to suppress you because they are a very big company. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of resources. They have a lot more workers. So people are less likely to believe the story of one worker, like just one worker out of a company with over 1,000 workers. So the company, it makes it easier for the company to suppress your voice.
Okay. Next thing, what else can happen?
And also they'll definitely fire you.
Yeah, they'll definitely fire me.
Yeah, but does it need to happen from the side of the worker?
I didn't understand what.
But like, if this sort of a system is going to work, does it need to happen from the side of the laborer? Like, does it need to be a laborer stepping forward or just the involved? So, for example, if we're questioning the Chinese government about Uyghur Muslims, does it need to be the Uyghur Muslim present in China to step up, or just some random white American in America?
I mean, what do you think has more impact? Like a person who comes from the oppressed voice or the person who is like a third person?
I do think that it would be that if we're talking about impact, then it obviously would be a person that can actually relate with the movement, because then
Hmm.
anger does have some sort of an impact to it. But in the case of a lack of capability to do so, I the alternative to it is much more sufficient, right?
True. So you can make a trade-off that look, sure, my job is gone, but I think like it will still give more awareness to people who have seen my post. And therefore it's like enough of a trade-off, meaning like more people would be aware of it. And there are like NGOs to support me in of itself, like there are labor organizations for that matter, right? So we're not living in a world where people don't care about labor laws at all. But secondly, there are laws which says that if I am like initiating an industrial dispute against a company, they can't essentially fire me. So they cannot fire me whatsoever. And that's like a protection that I have gotten. So you can use this as well. But then thirdly, I think the idea that like, look, oh, companies have like huge platforms, resources, etc., is also going to give them like upper hand in order to be able to, let's say, fight a suit because they have better access to lawyers. So even if, let's say, you have a good amount of like labor union, and then you have a lawyer, and then as opposed to them having a lawyer, which is essentially like paid enough and all of that, it's significantly going to make a big difference. But let's go on. Why do you think? How do you think we can like stop exploitation? We can have Arav, we can have Anna Rajput, Anna Dhingra. Go on.
I have thought like if you go for it, like you will like suppress, like go ahead and say that this is happening to me. The other people that are going through the same thing might support you. So the company might have to hear, like other people will believe you.
Relatability
You
and
can't say
collective
just one person is going ahead, so the one person is lying. If more of you go ahead and say that this has been happening to us, it will have more effect on people because one person might be lying, but loads of them can't like all be saying the same thing. Something must be happening in actual.
Correct.
Ma'am, another solution can be for the laborers to go on strike or sit-ins.
Very good. Like let's just impact the arguments of the argument of strike. Why do you think strike essentially is a very good idea to work against the company?
Because it even catches the attention of the media, and at the same time, like any harms or anything which is brought upon you or anything which happens to you because of the strike will be blamed on the company. So the company is pressurized to respond to the strike.
Anything
But
else?
But also the company would not get his work done.
Yeah, exactly. They have a
But like
dependency on they have a dependency of the
yeah,
employees. Right? So if the employees are going on strike, they're not getting
exactly.
the job
Yes.
done.
Their
Obviously,
work will suffer.
Yes. So, like you can just like simply characterize that like the only thing that people care about in terms of like the administrative people or the people in power is basically money. The moment it's going to impact them in terms of money, they're going to be caring about it because that amount of, let's say my job was supposed to, let's say from 9 to 5, was supposed to work in the office, but what I'm doing is not working. I'm going collectively and like striking in front of in front of the building. That's essentially going to make sure that like there's no outcome, there is no output whatsoever. Yes, Nate.
Yeah, I just had a lot of doubts regarding this because if like we're talking about an entire population that is much more likely to want cheap products, then they might not care about this entire lower class. But because we're talking about privileged people prioritizing their privilege or prioritizing the rights of others, but be that the very existence of labor laws and them being really good in developing nations is not likely, because they do want MNCs, they do want such companies to get attracted to their natural resources. Then what is the likelihood that without any sort of cancel culture being present, because you're not able to impact this entire consumer population that much, and also about the fact that the government might just not care enough about you, that you're able to draw in any sort of positive impact?
So even if you get it, so basically your idea is that, oh, like developing nations don't really have laws. So even if you go and like strike, it isn't going to like give you any impact. Is okay. So that's based on the assumption that like developing nations don't have laws whatsoever, which is wrong. Because if you see India, and even if you see like, can you imagine Pakistan has better labor laws than India, and Pakistan has even like ratified better conventions than India, like more convention in ILO, in National Labor Organization, than India, which is very surprising because we assume that developing nations don't have good laws. That's not the problem. The problem is basically there is no awareness, meaning people don't even know that like labor laws exist. People don't even know that they have rights of, let's say, like to go ahead and like create a dispute against the employers and stuff like that. So the moment when you have companies, the moment when you have strikes, is the moment. So don't you like see that the amount of traction that like news media gives to banker strikes from SBI, all of that. So it happens a lot. So that traction is in of itself going to help government. Let's say, okay, let's just take an example of government itself. So let's say government and the clerks of SBI are going ahead and like on a strike against the government. The whole day they don't work, it's going to impact the public service, which is banking, obviously, meaning people are not able to like encash and stuff like that, right? Meaning government is going to be pressurized to make those changes for you, simply because now the people are impacted by it and you are adamant to the kind of change that you actually want. But also like, even if it's impact the people and people are like, oh, why are they doing this and stuff like that, they would essentially know the reason why, because media channels essentially tell you why they're doing what they're doing. But also like people essentially relate to the idea that, look, like wages are essentially important, or look, workplace harassment is bad. All of these things still exist and people can relate to it, and therefore they would want to like they would want things to be changed for you. So I think that's like the thing that you're supposed to say. Like they just like don't always agree to the bad characterization of like developing nations. They do have India has ratified a lot of ILO conventions. They have obligation to do and perform a lot of like laws in and of itself. The basic laws are there. It's just that you want awareness for people to even know that these rights exist. Okay, moving forward, cool. Then you have capitalism, and then you have advantages and disadvantages of capitalism. I think I wanted you all to tell me, but then I'll just go on and tell you the advantages and disadvantages. I mean, obviously, capitalism has better efficiency because there's innovation and increased productivity. And then you have better market, more choices, more competition, market regulation method, meaning like, so people essentially think that, oh, the moment there's going to be a capitalism, people are going to be like having unregulated prices of these like these commodities. But that's really wrong, because the moment there is competition, let's say I have an industry, and then Vedant has an industry, and then Navya has an industry. I'm a very big profit-oriented individual, and I sell the same product at 1,000 rupees, and Vedant sells the same product at 200 rupees. Nobody is going to go ahead and like buy my product simply because there exists this internal check mechanism between me and Vedant that, look, if I'm going to extremely like inflate my prices, there's going to be somebody in the manufacturing market who is going to sell the product in, let's say, more reasonable price, and therefore my product, nobody's going to go ahead and buy them, right? Which means that like even if capitalism exists, it still makes sure that the prices are not inflated enough, and it still makes sure, because obviously you still have competition, people are still going to be buying the lesser prices and stuff like that. So just like give this analysis and say that, look, there exists an internal mechanism to make sure that the price in of itself is regulated, but also people are always going to make sure that the quality product is being like sold to them, meaning who amongst me, Navya and Vedant is able to give them reasonable price and reasonable quality. That's the product that people are going to essentially go ahead and buy. But thirdly, there is also job creation. Obviously, when you have like when you want productivity, you essentially want job creation. It can be based on skills, it can be based on unskilled labor, it can be based on the people who actually manage the executive and stuff like that. So you also have more green tech, meaning more like you think that capitalism essentially like exploits a lot of resources, but it also leads to it has led to green tech simply because they have they are the ones who came up with electric cars and stuff like that. But also you have better space exploration simply because they have more money to like invest in that. They have more productivity with respect to that. But then you also have consumer satisfaction because there's wide range of products that are being given to you, and therefore like if I want at this point in time, if I think that, oh, I think I should probably have a thing which can make like if I'm going to wear it on my head, is going to like make sure that all of my like thoughts are being like accumulated one one place, it's probably going to give me that because it has innovation and stuff like that, right? And then lastly, it treats needs of the like society and creates solution. So even if you want to say that, look, oh, capitalism, like so the fact that capitalism exists and the fact that innovation exists is related to the idea that you would make sure to solve every problem in the society. I think you have, if you have seen Shark Tank India, you would be able to relate it better because like then when people come up with like different products, and then the sharks essentially like rejected them simply because they think that, oh, there's not a like a large amount of solution, or there is not a large amount of problem that you're solving, they reject the products, right? So essentially what capitalism does is make sure that the needs of the society are being fulfilled and there is some amount of solution that is being given. So for example, like recycling, right? Like better roads by recycling in the first place, meaning like people were essentially saying that, oh, plastic is bad and a lot of plastic gets wasted. So okay, there are no like good roads in India, use this amount of plastic to, let's say, create these roads from the recycling, or like by recycling plastic in the first place. So these are the reasons why capitalism can be good. I am sure you can come up with better reasons as well. There is it's essentially subjective, up to your thinking. Now going on to the capitalism and its disadvantages, we all know about, we are communists and all. So you have monopoly of people with most capital. Obviously, if it is fair, like free market, free trade, people who have the upper hand in terms of having the most capital, people who are richer, are going to be able to have more resources and therefore being able to like produce more and give more products to the community. But then secondly, there's also like exploitation of labors, meaning the more like private individuals have profit motive because they want to sustain themselves in the market for the longer run. Meaning, if that is the case, so they are more likely to exploit the labors, and also they're more likely to exploit the consumers. I want this thing to be a little bit of like conversation, like a discussion. But tell me, how do you think capitalism exploits consumer? Because we all know that it obviously like exploits the laborers, but tell me how it exploits the consumers.
I have this theory which people have told me is illogical, but I do think that capitalism disbalances the market in this scenario wherein, there's a presumption that always the producer is under the consumer, whereas that gets reversed. But surely capitalism is based upon the principle that the producer would always be with the consumer, would always be under the consumer, because they like to make things that the consumer wants. The demand part of it is sure that the existence of products would be on the basis of what exactly the consumer needs. But on the counterfactual, and when we talk about prices of products, it won't be necessarily about the consumer. It will rather be about the capitalist being able to ensure much more profits. So if, let's say, a random company has to make this one packet of biscuits, it won't be then upon the basis of the accessibility of these packets to all the poor people. Rather than it would be upon the basis of it getting to the high class individuals, and understanding that that particular market in itself is wide enough for them to gain that much amount of profits. They might be happy enough to do that, because somewhere I do think that due to globalization, capitalists at the end of the day do not want to be limited to the market of, let's say, a particular country, let's say India only. Britannia doesn't want to be an Indian company. It does want to extend its reach to Southern Asia and then probably to the United States or UK at large.
Makes sense. I think that's not illogical at all. I think that's true. But I think I also want to give an example. Do you all know about like the like why Parle-G was going into so much loss? Like the company Parle-G, the biscuits.
Not really.
Do you all know the money, like the price of the biscuit?
Yeah, it was very like rupees 1 or so.
Yeah, it like earlier it was 2 rupees, and then it like then went to 5 rupees, and now I think it's 10 rupees again. But I think because of the very fact that it was very less, and they went into losses and people stopped buying it. But then that's because like the cost of production is that, and they didn't want to like essentially inflate the prices because they felt that Parle-G was essentially consumed by people who were, like the workers who would just like take 1 cup of tea and then 1 packet of Parle-G just to like consume something, and they're like, they're not empty stomachs. They're not on an empty stomach. I think these are the things which are being considered by a company to see that, okay, this is my consumer base. If I'm going to increase my price more than that, nobody's going to buy my product in the first place. So yeah, disbalance in the market is true. What other things? Do you think like advertisement? Okay, yeah, go on.
Yeah, ma'am, something I feel that capitalism really like hurts like the general like consumers is that they necessarily, because capitalism inherently needs like new products to like continue the hype and continue getting consumers. And because of that, because you can't make these products like last for very long, you downgrade the products, you make these products worse. So it isn't necessarily good for the consumer. An example of this would be how light bulb companies eventually started reducing the quality of their light bulbs because they realized that these light bulbs ran for a really long time, and if they didn't reduce it, they wouldn't really be making profits because the people would no longer buy from them.
Correct. So because like the filament essentially could like last for like years and then nobody was buying them again, they wanted to repeat consumers. I think that's a really good point. Another, I wanted to just give you a hint. Do you think like a lot of things that like are advertised to us, we actually need them?
But in this point which Vedant brought up, wouldn't if you want repeat customers, for example, Apple, they send a device and then there are multiple software updates, right? First year, second year, there are good software updates, speed up the computer, whatever. Third year, fourth year, they start making it slow, right?
Yeah,
Obviously, this is because they want repeat customers. You want to buy a new product. So
exactly.
first of all, you're back with the trends, right? And then second of all, you want a very functioning high tech device. But why wouldn't this is Apple? Yeah, I agree that they have a great loyalty base. But for other companies, wouldn't they just like try exploring different options that maybe are more durable? Why would they want to go back to the same thing when they know that it's not working for them initially?
No, I think like the fact with durable products is that you can't just sustain on them because people would it would just be a one-time thing. So if I make, let's just take an example of iron box. Let's like assume that it like runs for 5 years. If I buy it right now, for next 5 years, the company has no profit, no business, and that's why companies are more likely to not have durable goods. And if they're making durable goods, they would have like other niches as well. They would also have like alternative products that they're sustaining on, so that the company does not like die. So I think also iPhone is able to sustain not just because of the popularity and the loyalty of the customers, but also like the advertisement that they have, like the whole idea that, oh, iPhone is so superior and stuff like that, even though there's nothing cool about it. So
Probably then we can dwell upon the idea that okay, advertisements are misleading, and this addictive nature that is created by capitalists to actually want that much amount of popular demand, to be that relatable to society, to be that cool in society, that you have the latest Apple product, hey, you're the one that's rich in the friend group, and that probably demand that brand creation is essential for capitalists. Because right now, currently, if I'm buying a leather bag that is from a random company, not that popular, that I want this bag to last. The very moment I start buying this bag from Gucci, it doesn't matter if it lasts only a day, but it's a bag from Gucci. That's the point of it. It doesn't need to have the quality, it doesn't even need to have the design. It just needs to have the brand tag.
true, that's true. Okay, so what I was trying to say is that advertisements essentially like manipulate the choices that you have, meaning even if you don't need a particular thing, they would make you buy that because they essentially like try to influence your psychology and tell that, look, this is what you like want in the first place. And that's why like things like cosmetics industry essentially is going ahead and like thriving in market, simply because you essentially like capitalize on the emotions of, let's say, females. Let's just take the example of females. Like they tell you that, look, oh, you don't necessarily look good if you are not fair in the first place, and then like you tell them, oh, like buy Fair and Lovely and all of that nonsense. So essentially they try to like capitalize on the emotions and the insecurities of people, and then tell you that, oh, this is the like the cream which is essentially going to give you more glow and all of that. So it basically influences your agency and things that you actually don't need, but tells you that, oh, you need this in the first place. And that's how you like exploit the choices of the customers as well. So like if you want to make this argument, there's something called as like agency, like the principle of agency. Capitalism takes that principle of agency from you, the ability to make the decision as to what you essentially want based on the rationality. Like it basically takes away the rationality from individuals. But like moving on, why like capitalism is bad. I think we have already dealt with that. There's exploitation, there is exploitation of consumer, environmental harms because you're more likely to go ahead and excessively extract the resources. There is inequality, simply because there is there's no like equal footing of, let's say, two companies, and therefore the people who have more resources essentially are going to be able to like thrive, and therefore there's going to be a whole cycle that like the rich is always going to be richer and the poor is always going to be poor, simply because the rich is going to go ahead and then exploit this poor laborer, and that's problematic. Then you have lack of job satisfaction. So even if you're working from 9 to 5, there's no appreciation. You're working the same thing. You work as a robot. You don't like your job, and therefore there's no job satisfaction as well. And then there's materialism. It essentially tells you that like, oh, materialism is extremely important. Philosophy out of the window. Then you have business over needs. I think it just tells you that like, like people's needs and people's people like supporting people, helping people is essentially less important as opposed to having a business minded mentality. But I also want to talk to you about like a little bit about monopolies and how monopolies are created by capitalism. Do you want to tell me as to like why monopoly is essentially bad? Why do you think monopoly is basically one company or like one manufacturing unit having the dominance over the entire market? So for example, when we talk about like toothpaste, I think we all talk about Colgate and other, like, I think now though you still have like more companies coming out, but then initially it was just Colgate. So toothpaste equals to Colgate is what we knew.
Maybe they can abuse their power, like force
How
people to
exactly?
do,
They can
like
exploit
increasing
the
the price of
customers.
people.
Okay, just
Like,
a second.
they can like have a lot of power with the like capitalization. So like they can like force the prices to be increased, or their products or some other products like they're like making, because
Correct.
they have like a lot of like
Price increase then, Vedant? No, it
Yeah,
was
I
Arav. It was wait,
okay.
Arav.
Yeah, I wanted to say the same thing. When there's no competition, then there's no one to challenge the price they put on any product whatsoever. So they can put as high a price as they want, as long as the customer still needs the product.
True. Next.
Yeah, I
I
feel
think,
like okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
I
can go
feel
ahead.
yeah, okay. I feel that when you have like this monopoly, the market isn't educated on the actual cost of the product. So the market doesn't know what's right, whether the company is being ethical or not. And additionally, it reduces the chances of like, for example, another company coming out which like reduces the competition and therefore reduces the
That's
actual
actually a very good
increase.
a point, like the idea that like you would suppress a new company coming out. Can you give me an
Yeah.
example?
You could say like in India especially, you had there were like after India separated from the British, you had bans on companies like Coca-Cola, like soft drink companies, especially because they weren't giving the Indian government a stop. And because of that, you had monopolies like big soft drink companies like Thumbs Up coming into the picture and therefore monopolizing on this market. And because of that, like increasing the prices and like setting a certain standard for the market.
Makes sense. Do you know about both the earphones, the boat earphones company?
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see the Shark Tank episode where the person essentially goes ahead and buys? Yeah. Yeah. So that's also one of the things. Cool. Any other thing?
Yeah, if there are a lot of monopolies, like choices are reduced for the people to like go for. As you said, at Colgate, so someone might want to go for Sensodyne or some Himalayan toothpaste. So
Which
like
wasn't existing back then, but now yes.
yeah, but yeah,
I
it
have
might
ano-
like reduce the choices for the people to choose from.
I have another example of like suppressing a new company.
Hmm.
For example, like Apple, it's dominating the phone market, right? And then now there's this new company called Nothing, like Nothing Food. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
I didn't even know about Nothing.
Yeah, so it's basically like a company which is actually like good phones. It's one of the
Okay.
top phones, but since Apple is like it's dominating, right? This everybody's like, yeah, I have an Apple phone. There's literally no hype around maybe like another Xiaomi phone.
True.
So I think that's also one thing that
Yes, Nate.
Yeah, I had a question to this. Like, do monopolies even have the power to dominate if we don't let them? So the analysis to this question is that in the scenario wherein this company has gone on with the power to actually fluctuate the prices irrespective of the people's demand, just because it is the only say sole running factor in the entire market, like the very arguments that you run that there's a price increase, there's no price variation, etc. In this scenario then, with the availability of another company coming up providing cheap products, won't it be easier for this lower class at least to switch to this particular company?
It's
That
easier. It's easier, yes, but then the ability of monopoly to buy of buying that company, very high.
Right. Another question to this then. Like, what exactly constitutes a company buying another company? Like, I know this might be very stupid to ask, but
No, I think it's just basically like you going ahead and taking the ownership of the entire company. So it's
agree.
basically,
Agree. But if I don't like let that company take ownership, because you can only take my laptop when I give it to you, right? You cannot start stealing it.
yeah, so I cannot, yeah, that's a good point. You cannot snatch it away from the other company. So like basically saying that, oh, it's just an assumption that like the company is going to be able to buy it. But then if I tell you, Sneh, I'm going to pay you 10 lakhs for the laptop that you have, wouldn't you give it to me?
I would, but then is it the fault of the monopoly at last, or is it just the fault of the newcomers?
That's why the argument to that then is that there is no trade-off to monopolies. You can never stop them. Like anything in this entire world cannot stop monopolies, except for, let's say, communism, or except for like extreme difficult laws, which stops the idea that, look, okay, if you're a big company, you cannot like buy a small company in of itself, or the idea that like there's something called as price capping. So monopolies have tendency of high prices. So what you do as a government is that cap on those price, right? You just tell them, okay, like that's the highest price that you essentially like keep on these individuals in the first
Ma'am,
place. Yeah.
I feel that monopolies would want competitors again, because like when they have smaller competitors, their
Hmm.
products seem more superior. Like for example, without any competitors to Apple, Apple seems like a good product. But when you put it up against something like a Motorola phone from the 1990s or a Nokia from the 1990s, then the Apple phone's like superiority just goes up when compared to the smaller companies. And because of that, I feel that I feel that monopolies themselves would want like
Hmm.
actual competitors.
Okay. But like, sure, I think that can be a thing. But even apart from that, I think like monopolies also have more capability of doing better things because of the resources that they have. Like for example, they can go on and like monopolize on the supply market, or they can go on and monopolize on the ability of people or consumers to even know that you exist, simply because there's something called as like shelf priority. So like when you see like a particular product being kept in front of you on the shelf, that means that that particular product has paid the company. Let's say it was Walmart, or let's say it's just like a random mall that you're in. So that shelf price is also more accessible to these monopolies because they have more capital. So the ability of like you being able to manipulate the entire supply chain is also very like higher. So yeah, like I think it can be just considered best to why monopolies are good. But yeah, like it's just there. Like, okay, anything else, like if you want me to answer, other than that, I'll just go on to, can we control monopoly?
Just like a question to this then, that in the scenario of if there is a monopoly present and if Google is already there and you want furthering small companies to come in, does it then does is there any onus right now in the current status quo upon Google to actually aid these companies to come forward, or to, let's say, move aside just to create space?
I mean, I didn't understand. So you want Google to invest in other companies, or?
No, like not invest in other companies necessarily, because that would be determining about what they do with their money, right? And that's not something they can extend your capabilities to. But rather than about the owners that Google in itself has as a company, right? That to push forward this presumption that okay, Google is taking up a lot of space that it should. That is to say that you can only sell if you're allowed to sell. you can only provide goods if people let you provide goods. You can only be present on shelves if people let you be present on shelves. So is there a scenario or is there a mechanism where Google in itself is not allowed by people to come in just to create space?
Yes, you're saying that like yeah, I think government can make policies to like regulate it, like to not be able to, have the shelf access, or to not be able to have the access to supply chains and everything. So I think that's why competition law exists. So all of this can be regulated. So I'm not saying that cannot be, but in real life, people care more about like money, and therefore things like these still exist. And therefore people like us, it's just like people like us who care about like why are they getting the access. Others don't really care about it. I mean, there are more things that people care about. But yeah, like so I think like yeah, we can create policies to control shelf access or access
A
to
follow-up question to this then.
okay.
Yeah, like what incentive does a government exactly have to prioritize a monopoly? Because like in the counterfactual of monopoly being present, they have much more entrepreneurs coming in, there are more companies and more revenue generation. Why won't the government then prioritize like, small?
They won't, yeah, they won't prioritize them. That's why they have like laws to regulate it. Yeah, so they do have laws to regulate it, so that you cannot make an argument that, oh, governments are always going to support monopolies. So no.
So isn't this a counterfactual to what the Modi government is doing currently?
um Probably, but I don't think like they specifically or like manifestly say that, oh, I want to like support Reliance. So
No, it's not about what they want, it's what they're saying, what they're doing exactly. Because like even when we talk about United States, even with all the 1990s debates about whether or not you should have Facebook, Microsoft, etc., 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 didn't they actually end up prioritizing them? Because at the end of the day, you do understand that they're not stupid enough to not realize what they're doing. They're just intelligent enough to not actually see it.
I mean, that's also because of the fact that like Reliance gives money to the political party. I mean, it's not just like BJP though, like they also like buy stocks from Congress. So it's basically like if a particular company is giving me money, I owe back to them, because that's why corporate lobbying exists. So monopolies, because they have so much sustenance, so much access to power, so much access to capital, they also have access to money, and therefore they can use it to sustain that monopoly as well. So yeah, that also exists. It's a back and forth argument. We can't come to an end to that. So anything else? How can we control monopoly? Think. Do you think incentivizing people to start businesses is going to control monopoly?
No, because like monopolies, if it is a monopoly, they do have the power to crush that also, right? Because the problem wasn't ever about the participation in the industry, it was always about these people not enough having enough power to survive in the industry.
So let's just give them surviving ability as well.
How?
By government aids. Like you like making sure that these people are getting, let's say, tax subsidies and all of that, so that they are sustaining in longer run, like the same thing, like self-reliant policy of India.
But like in the worst case, in the scenario that government aids are also not present just because it's the government. So what?
Let's not talk about Modi government anymore, please. Okay, let's go on. I think like it's just the worst case scenario. So let's just okay. Coming on to the US currency versus China. So there's this very good debate, which was the world's debate this year, 2022. You should probably watch. It's the finals. And it was about whether or not like the US dollar should be like used as a centralized currency. And then so that's why I have put this specifically here. So there's this whole debate going on in the world, which is about like how US currency can go ahead and like no how like the Chinese currency can go over and like dominate US currency, and then everybody would then have to like have the relative currency to what the Chinese currency is, simply because the currency and who is the dominant currency, or the who is a global currency, is dependent on the fact as to who is the biggest global economy. So earlier, if it was UK, it was overthrown by US because of the fact that they were able to like establish that economic superpower and economic superiority. right? That's the same thing that's happening with the Chinese currency as of now, because they're gaining a lot of popularity. They're gaining it simply because like there is a lot of debt that is being like created in terms of like the entire like global chain, and therefore people are giving more importance to the currency in of itself. But also Chinese economy is like trashingly good, and therefore they have a lot of like economic power as well. But why then we should still like care about, you know, US currency over China? And is it so easy for China, like USA, to overcome, or like, you know, is it so easy for China to go ahead and like overthrow US currency? The answer is no. It has to have a lot more popularity. It has to have a lot more acceptance. It has to have a lot more you know, ability to influence people. And all of it is not going to come simply because China is China, and people don't care about China because of the kind of exploitation that exists, because there is no democracy and stuff like that. But how you are supposed to analyze it in a debate is basically, one, US currency is more stable simply because of the economy and the investment that are there in USA. And you can essentially predict what is going to come insofar as USA economy is concerned, but you can't predict with respect to China as to like how the economy is going to be in 2 years, because of the fact that China makes like excessive amount of investments. And you can also call them like, you know, no, like not like mindful investment of itself. And therefore you cannot never predict the economic stability of China. And therefore it's bad for the global economy if you're going to centralize a Chinese currency. But secondly, there is no check mechanism with respect to USA, because obviously USA is a democratic nation, you can call them out. But then China does not have democratic system, and therefore it's like very like problematic. But also USA cares about like other things like sanctions and all of that, but China does not care about sanctions as well. So you cannot essentially like call them out as a like international community. But thirdly, there is also internal check mechanism, meaning like the moment a country has democracy, the internal public in of itself has the ability to call out the government. So if you say that, oh, India is doing extremely bad with the economy, people can call out the Indian government and say that, oh, you're doing pathetic with the Indian economy. But you can't necessarily do it with China, because it's China, and it's like the autocratic nation, the dictatorship. Like you say anything against, they don't really care. But also you don't have the ability to say anything against the government, right? So the internal check mechanism does not exist with respect to China, and therefore you don't know as to what's happening in China. There's no transparency. What are the economic policies? And therefore all of it is probably going to be very volatile with respect to Chinese currency. But also the idea that like perception of USA in terms of security is more, people think that USA dollar is more like secured, and the currency reserve is also more secured as opposed to China. And then also the fact that the Chinese economy is good, but then it hasn't necessarily overthrown USA as of now. So it's also like it has to come like in the like near future or like far future or whenever it is. But then there are certain kind other like aspects as well in order to consider a particular currency as a global currency in of itself. Then what you have is basically a very difficult topic, and I want to deal with that and get over with this as of now. So the idea of International Monetary Fund, and why. So you understand there is international institutions that are existing, right? Meaning there are like certain institutions which make sure that the international community is essentially having a collective front against, let's say, fighting with the global problems that people have. So do you understand that all the countries don't necessarily have equal economic footing, and all countries also don't have good amount of like economic capacity and like ability to fight with poverty and stuff like that, right? So if that is the case, why the EMF in of itself was formed was basically four reasons. One, stability of the international monetary system. Second, enables countries and their citizens to like transact with each other because they have some amount of like common like ground. But then thirdly, there is a like it has to address the lack of cooperation between the countries, because if you don't have a common system which is able to help the people who are, let's say, developing nations, so there's no like proper cooperation between the nations by in of itself. But it also follows the 5 Ps, which is people, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnership. And that's the entire principle of why EMF actually like exists. But how does EMF get money? Because you essentially think that, oh, like where is it coming, like where the money is coming from? And this whole argument about like the international relations that, oh, EMF, like IMF is probably not going to like fund the developing nations or like fund anyone who is against USA simply because IMF is USA. That's actually wrong, but also partially true, because of the fact that, you know, there's something called as member quotas, meaning like the amount that you pay as a subscription fee to be a member of IMF, right? So it basically shows it basically reflects the economic position that you have in terms of the entire like world, right? So let's say USA obviously would have more member quota because they have more economic power, but this quota or this amount that you're obliged to pay to the institution essentially also determines couple of things. First, your voting power. So your voting power in the IMF is proportionate to the kind of like member quota that you have, right? Meaning, therefore, like USA has more voting like quota as opposed to, let's say, France and like all of those like Western nations. But also, it determines the amount of loans that you can take. Meaning, USA obviously can take more loans from IMF as opposed to India, but also the amount of share that you're going to get at the end. But secondly, so there are three ways how you can get money as an IMF. One, obviously, member quota, the subscription fee. Second, the bilateral borrowing agreements, that is BBA. And third, there is new arrangement of to borrow. So you don't need to know about how exactly it goes and all of that. You just need to know that there are three ways. One is like bilateral agreement. So like the institution can have a bilateral agreement with their country, and it's going to be taken as a loan, and it's only going to be used if like member quota, the entire fund is going to be extreme, like the entire fund is not able to fund the nation which needs money. Then they'll go to the bilateral borrowing agreement, and then they'll go to new arrangements to borrow, like multilateral agreement, where a lot of countries are going to be collectively giving you the loan, which is like the last resort, right? So basically it'll make sure that, okay, whichever reserve that I have through the quota, I'll utilize that in order to give money. But if a large amount of money is needed, then they'll go to the bilateral borrowing system and stuff like that. Just to tell you that, oh, if like the economy of the entire nation or of most of the nations is gone, what would the IMF do is basically borrowing from the countries who have the capability to like give loans and stuff like that. Then you have something called as how does the IMF get funds? I think I've already told you, member quotas, new arrangements to borrow, and bilateral borrowing. But also I want to tell you that why IMF is still like existing is because of the budget that it has, meaning a large number of people are members of IMF, and therefore you have like a budget of like total 650 millions, which is a lot like to give in terms of like borrowing and like all of that. So that's why it is a very high budget. But what are the advantages of IMF or this institution is simply like several. One, obviously you have the ability to give out loans. It helps in maintenance of balance of payment of nation. Basically the balance of payment is like largely the idea that, look, I as a government of India, I should have more public revenue as opposed to my public spending, right? So my expenditure should never like increase as opposed to my like the revenue that I'm getting, simply because it means that the entire nation is going in loss. And if it is in loss, you would need some money to like recover that loss, and that's therefore the balance of payment of a nation is supposed to be maintained. And therefore at this point of time you can go to the IMF and take loans. But thirdly, it assists in formation of economic policies. So for example, if India does not know how to come out of inflation, you can go on like ask IMF as to how you can do it. But also there are several reports that IMF goes ahead and like channelizes and also gives, so that like you can like take reference from it. But also there's extreme like increased opportunity of trade and investment. They will tell you how you can do it. Also it makes sure that the promotion of financial stability and monetary cooperation is there. So all of it like basically it tells you that how you can have better productivity, job creation, economic well-being. So basically it makes sure that your economic well-being is settled by giving you advice and stuff like that. But there are also disadvantages of IMF. For example, it's conditional. So it doesn't give out loan to everyone. It has conditional loans, meaning if it is giving you money, it is going to make sure that it is also going to go ahead and influence your microeconomics, meaning like the policies that are going to be there in your nation. It's going to make sure that the government spending is cut off. It's going to make sure that the building, like it's making sure that there is full safety nets towards the economy being given, but also it's going to make sure that you have international reserves and all of that. So what it would want is to reduce taxes on the trade, but increase taxes on consumption. So these are the several things that like it would tell you to do as a country if you're taking loans from it. So it's conditional, it's not absolute. Secondly, you have control over the internal economy, right? So if IMF is giving loan to India, it's also going to have control over the internal economy, basically based like telling you that, look, you cannot subsidize the domestic industry. So for example, India cannot go ahead and like give the entrepreneurs and like the money in terms of subsidies, simply because India is at loss. And if you subsidize domestic industry, it means that you're increasing the expenditure that government can do in and of itself, right? Also, it would tell you that, oh, it increased the exports. So for example, what happened in Peru was like what happened in Ivory Coast, I guess. So in Ivory Coast, what they did was that, look, you have a lot of cocoa, so go ahead and like export as much amount of cocoa as possible, which led to like loss of forests in the place itself, right? So it would also tell you that, oh, go ahead and like have privatization, which means that the nation has to go ahead and like make sure that there is more profits and everything. Obviously, you know that what are the harms of privatization. Then there's also lack of accountability, because IMF as an institution, obviously, as I said, like the voter, like the more votes that you have, the more ability you have to influence the policy. Therefore, like USA would always have a lot of say. But also there's a lot of like secrecy and exclusion of the affected nations. For example, if you're like determining a debt package for a particular nation, you cannot assess like that nation itself cannot determine as to how like the education or health is going to be taken care of. That's problematic, but also it has social impact. For example, because IMF is now going to tell you that you have to reduce public spending, things like government colleges, government like schools cannot go ahead and like give free education, meaning now the downtrodden individuals cannot have access to education because they don't have the capability to, let's say, go ahead and access education. They don't have money to go ahead and do it. But also because there is a lot of, like privatization and everything, there can be violation of labor laws, because essentially you want to make sure that there's more profit and stuff like that. But also there's the biggest disadvantage of IMF is that the moment when there is failure to pay, there is a cyclical debt, right? For example, Peru initially they took like 2.5 billion of debt, and then after 7 years, when they were not able to like pay back the debt, the entire like 2.7 billion around increased to 9 billion, which means that, oh, you're just like in a debt trap, which is essentially bad for a country. But then why essentially this conditional idea is good is basically like, as IMF, you cannot go ahead and give money to, let's say, Sudan, just like even after knowing that there is so much like human rights violation, even after knowing that they won't be able to like go ahead and like give back the money to you, because you live on the money and you live on the loan, like the loans that you're giving to them, which means that you look forward to get back the money. It's not an aid, it's like a loan, right? So meaning you would make sure that there is some amount of check on that particular nation so that you get back that money, right? We essentially know that a large number of developing nations who take money or who need money essentially don't have good administration, don't have a lot of corruption and stuff like that. Meaning, if that is the case, even if you're going to give them some amount of money, it's never going to come back, right? So if you're going to give them unconditional money, it's not going to like ever come back to you, and therefore you want that amount of like control over those nations, for being able to make sure that the money reaches to the best people, and B, to make sure that you receive back the money and there is like they are not like into the cyclical debt, because essentially when you are in loss in economy, that's because of the policies of government to a very huge extent. Therefore, you would make sure that, oh, at least I'm trying to get the policies into picture. But there's also one debate going on saying that why China as an alternative can thrive probably. And I think I've already told you as to why China is a bad alternative to everything. But like in general, if you want to know as to like why IMF should be preferred over China, is basically A, China has volatile economy. B, China has cyclical debt trap, meaning Sri Lanka and what they're doing to Sri Lanka. But also like if China is giving you money, they cannot simply give you because like, oh, you're like suffering, but it always comes to a cost of, let's say, building ports in Sri Lanka, or let's say dumping like garbage in Bangladesh, or let's say, just like having the access to land resources and assets of that nation. So just know that like, there is always a comparative that exists. So even if like China is like giving you easy access to loan, it's not essentially good, simply because it has a backstory behind it, and China always has an ulterior motive. All right. Also, like if you would take loans from China, the West is always going to backlash you and also going to sanction you out, and therefore you shouldn't take loans from China. Again, there are like obviously a lot more institutions like World Bank, World Trade Organization, in Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is basically associated with BRI. I think I think you need to know about it, because like China gives a lot of loans just by the virtue of like BRI, but then also like, like India essentially is not a part of OBOR, but India supports BRI and like getting loans from India supports AIIB, not BRI, I'm sorry. So India has as of now taken to a 28.9 billion of loan from the AIIB, but we aren't necessarily part of OBOR. part of OBOR. You can read this out later, but because it's like we're just running out of time. But then the problem with these institutions that there's lack of collective action, because there's something called as East and West. People essentially, even if an international institution exists, we can't come to a common ground because individuals have different interests. Developing nations have different interests. Developed nations have different interests. Urgency of interest is also different. The policies are also different. Therefore, a common ground can never be achieved. Second, high influence of Western policies, because they essentially think that, oh, they're superior and stuff like that. Or also like, because there is so high amount of like change or gap between like the price and the currency, it essentially needs to like inflated like rates for individuals. So for example, if India has to trade with USA, or India has to take money from USA and all of that, it's going to be inflated price. Then you have something called as one belt one road initiative. I'm just going to give you this brief explanation as to what exists and why it exists. I mean, the big amount of reason as to why it exists is like obviously to have global dominance over in terms of economy, but also creating larger access of Chinese market towards other nations, specifically in Asia, Africa, Europe. How it is actually market is that, we would give you access to like, big network and roadways and railways and maritime ports and everything. But then the point is that like if it is being like built in a particular nation, obviously in return to that, China is investing into the local like projects of these nations, and it basically tries to show that, we are helping smaller countries and giving an easy exports and everything. But then like, and I just want to give you this fact that like, currently Pakistan and Nepal are also part of OBOR. Basically the fact is that we are going to have a connectivity which is going to connect the entire Asia, Africa, Europe to China, and then China is going to be able to have bigger network in terms of roadways, railways, and everything, and being able to like export more of the Chinese products and stuff like that. But do you think India should join OBOR, and why not?
Probably just because of the amount of, Chinese monopolistic impact over this particular initiative. Though there might be a question that why exactly are we so estranged or so, hostile towards China as an actor, but simply because of the past relations and the amount of military damage, or let's say political damage, that China has already done, the very probability of providing them much more power by our own very government can be endangering.
So you're going to give them more power if you are going to join it.
Yeah, and China being China, you don't want to do that. But probably a favorable argument to this is that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Right. So a favorable argument to this then can be that India right now as an actor is somewhat estranged to the idea of free trade, that the amount of subsidies that we have implemented on wheat or oil has made us very closeted actor, and One Belt One Road initiative ensures the fact that you're much more connected to at least Southern Asia, but this is somewhat coherent to the current policy of looking not being non-aligned but looking at the neighbors at large. So this is probably what One Belt One Road would ensure, that India is much more relevant in this particular sector, but also not even about it being about India but about other countries. That if Sri Lanka, if Pakistan, if all these small southern Asian countries, somewhere countries that are dependent upon Indian trade, but also countries that India is dependent upon for its trade, if these countries are going to join such an initiative, it would actually just make India feel left out, and that can probably lead to much more issues.
Yeah, so like FOMO.
Yeah, FOMO, but like economic FOMO, so like loss FOMO.
Yeah. Okay. Vidal.
Yeah, I personally feel that if India joins OBOR, there is a higher chance that they are alienated by the West, because the Western world thinks of China as a bit of an enemy now because of like Chinese, like how far the Chinese have been growing and how they are expanding their hegemony, and their, like, you could even call it like a hegemonical empire. So I feel that through this, like, the tender relationships between India and the West would degrade. And because of this, India is no longer a part of those important Western circles. And because of that, India is more alienated than ever. And because of that, there is a lot of harm for India.
Correct. What else? Navya, Arav, Nishka. Think it was actually okay. You can also think of like other arguments, guys. It's about like military, it can be about political scenarios and everything. Think more. It's not just because it's like about economics today, you don't have to just restrict yourself to economics. Is it okay to give access to to China in India? Basically, like you're going to tell them, okay, you can use our Indian Ocean, you can use the territory of nation in order to build the road and everything. Tell me.
Um,
I
I
think that will lead to like kind of like a military dependency as well, because like then China will militarily be more superior, because they would essentially have like a better understanding of not only like your territorial waters but also land. So
also, I feel it wouldn't really be sitting right with the people of India, because for many years we have thought of China as this enemy, who is constantly trying to invade our borders, take over our territory. So because of that, I don't think politically it would be a good idea for leaders to go ahead and say, hey, we're going to be allying up with China for such an important project where national security is of the utmost importance, where there is a chance that China could go, yes, now that we know enough about Indian territory and how India itself works, we can probably launch an invasion, or we can probably annex a few parts of India, because India signed an agreement with us.
What
I
else?
think the main counterpoint to this, though probably not very practically strong, can be about the way international politics works. That even though you fought about, let's say, 3 wars with Pakistan, when it comes to nuclear weapons and when it comes to fighting with Marshall Islands about nuclear weapons, you somewhat stand on the very same pedestal. Because in international politics, you do not dwell upon based relationships or stagnant relationships, but we're going to be against each other forever. It's about the dependency of the topic, and also the differing stances that you have, because both the countries don't have an absolute stance. So when it comes to China, then why can't defense, let's say, be a different topic altogether, and this initiative be a different topic altogether? Because recently also there was this entire press conference that this committee had, and they said that China would ensure much more transparency from its own side, just to ensure that all the participants in this particular agreement are much more comfortable in the entire setup. Though a probable argument in this is that when you try to side with Pakistan, you're not exactly asking Pakistan to come in your country and to, let's say, go ahead and militarily attack you. It's just about a political agreement at a particular conference. In this scenario, then you're asking China to literally invade you, which is not the very same case.
Okay. What else? Is it okay that China can have access to Indian Ocean, and why is it bad?
I think the string of person that,
Yeah.
if China is trying to disconnect India from Western alliance, it is also much more logical for China to do that. Because if the very same analysis that Russia used, right, the more the West stays away from you, the more secure you are. Because China, at the end of the day, is trying to establish some sort of an Asian bloc which is able to stand against the West. The only actor that is strong enough to oppose that, or even if not strong enough, probably the strongest present out of all the alternatives, and probably the most estranged with China, is India in the near neighborhood, right? You cannot expect USA to again fight a war which is way too far from its borders. In this scenario, then you want India to be the buffer, you want India to be the scapegoat for the West. And if China is able to prevent that, they do not exactly have any near opposition, right? But also, like in the global market, when it comes to which MNC is going to invest in which country, India is the one that comes forward, like with China as probably the best option, but always an option. And when you have US as an actor influencing this, you know which one is going to get chosen, right? So in this scenario, then it becomes much more likely for China to not want India to come forward. Then again, there's a debate that hey, there's Vietnam present also. There's these smaller countries. There's this entire block of countries in South China Sea that hate China, but the military that India has and the combined military that all those countries has is the metric that the West would prefer. But also India is already Western inclination, and the lack of Western inclination of all these countries, because even if they might hate China, they just don't like the West, right? Because Western involvement at the end of the day is feared in Southern Asia post Afghanistan, post of all these interventions, etc.
Yes, true. Okay, going on. I just want to like finish this up. I think, why do you think China can be a good alternative to IMF? Just give me those reasons. I think I've already discussed a little bit when I was like going through the IMF. I just want to know if you understood how IMF works. So tell me why then China is a good alternative to
First was
IMF.
obviously the fact that China is coming as a big economy, so obviously more funds, etc., etc. But also probably the fact that China, as a developing nation and also as a nation with Asian roots, would be able to, let's say, not ensure Western dominance in the entire spectrum. So if IMF is right now working upon these quotas, and if these quotas are dominated by Western countries, we're able to bring in some amount of regional diversity in regards to interest with the presence of China at the very least.
Fair enough. Anything else? Arav, Vedant, Nishka. Think of the idea of conditional loans by IMF. China's loans aren't conditional. You ask for loans, they would give you.
Yeah, but they'll be at your neck the very next day also, nah?
But the cost is that I am probably going to use the oil reserves in your nation, but I'm still going to give you money, which IMF isn't instantly giving you. And at that point of time, you have the urgency to get money. So in the times of urgency, China is going to help you. Anything else? Vedant, Arav, do you all have anything, or you think it's just too far-fetched? And then China can never be a good alternative.
I don't have any more points per se.
Okay, cool. Let's just finish this up. Then I think the reason why then it is bad and why India shouldn't join it is because of the fact that there is obviously debt trap. And then you have bad implementation of OBOR. As of now, there has been no social changes that have been seen by OBOR. But thirdly, there's exploitation of labor because they want the projects to be so fast that they're going ahead and like doing as much amount of labor exploitation. But also China is like very prominently established in doing labor exploitations. But secondly, there's also a lot of corruption and scandals within those projects. Therefore, you wouldn't want your money or like your anything to be wasted in those projects. But secondly, there's also environmental hazards because they are excessively like utilizing resources. But also like with this OBR into picture, they're also like establishing this military bases in these spaces and stuff like that. That's also problematic. And then you have unsustainable loans, meaning in Malaysia they're going ahead and like giving loans, but then it's on the cost of like using their assets, using their loan, like using their land and stuff like that. Obviously, why India should not? It's not a level playing field in economy. The park in China. So because there is something called a CPEC, which goes through the POK, and the moment you're going to be a part of the OBOR project, is going to legitimize the idea that POK belongs to Pakistan, which is extremely bad, and also against the national security and interest. Again, it's also going to be able to capture the world market. It's very difficult for India to compete to the Chinese products in of itself. Therefore, even if there is going to be free trade, it's going to impact Indian economy to a very huge extent. But also Indian in of itself are against like the policies like self-reliant and against Chinese products and Chinese foods, and therefore it's strategically bad. In times of, even in times of war, let's say if there is a war, now China would have the access to you in the Indian Ocean as well, which is the only place which was safe for you, which means that you have no place for you to go ahead and get access as well. Therefore, it's bad. Last, I think how government can regulate spending. It's just basically random, like not random, but it's just like very general idea that like government can go ahead and like control your spending through three things. One, taxation. The moment they are going to implement taxes on you, you have less capacity to go ahead and spend because the amount that you have left after taxation is less. Secondly, on loans, government can give you loans, and then because you are supposed to go ahead and pay back the taxes and pay back the loans and also pay back the interest on the loans, you're going to again have less ability to go ahead and pay. But lastly, the idea of bank reserves, government can increase the amount of bank reserve that exists. Therefore, the amount of money that you're supposed to always keep in the bank is going to be increased, and therefore the money that you can spend then is going to be reduced. And that's pretty much it. The last thing that I had is that money matters and therefore economics matters. But that's largely it. There was a lot of good things like there were also again other things that could have been covered in the economy, but I think it's in and of itself a very vast and large subject. And I think you have already noticed that we discussed a lot more topics other than what is there in the slides as well. So that's pretty much it. But I want you all to read up on cryptocurrency because tomorrow's topic is going to be related to cryptocurrency. I'm giving this to you very prior. Yes.
Ma'am, can I stay back for like 5 minutes after the class ends? I just have a couple of questions to ask you.
Yeah, sure. Cool. So I just want you all to like read cryptocurrency, the problems with cryptocurrency, the regulations of cryptocurrency, everything like for tomorrow. I mean, obviously, I'm telling you this right now because cryptocurrency is a very delicate and like very difficult subject for motions. But I just want you to like go through it so that you can debate on it. Obviously, 1 hour is not enough, and that's why I'm giving this to you now. So if you hate cryptocurrency, don't hate me. That's the hot topic in the debate world. So okay, that's about it. If you have any questions, you can ask.
Ma'am, can I just like stay back after everyone